Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to be reading this history magazine article about hieroglyphs, the sacred writing of Egypt. I am so thrown off. This is the fifth time I've tried to film this video, getting this far before the kitten interrupts, and she's trying to interrupt again. She really needs to play right now. So you might hear her little toys in the background. She's been a menace. She's been crying. She's been running around. My goodness. So if you hear her playing with her toys finally, just ignore that. But anyway, this article was chosen by my channel members. And this article was chosen by Maxima, Alex, Robot Canary, Fectus, Lucas F, and CMB. Thank you so much for choosing this article for me to read to you tonight. And if you would like to choose a history magazine article, you can click the join button right down there, or click the very first link in the description box down there. My channel memberships are only 99 cents, the cheapest possible price I can set them to. And you get all kinds of perks. You get exclusive videos in which you guys get to request the topics. You get your name in every video. You get to watch every video early. And I'm about to do a live stream for 30,000 subscribers soon, and channel members will get their own special emojis. So there's all kinds of perks. So I'd love to have you along with me and all the other channel members. It's a fun little club. But let's get into this really neat article about hieroglyphs. If you see all of the shiny right there, it's because this paper is very glossy. Some of the pictures are very glossy. There's not much I can do about it, so I apologize if that distracts you. But let's get into facts about hieroglyphs. The beginnings of hieroglyphic writing date back to the birth of ancient Egypt at the end of the 4th millennium BCE. Hear that little sad kid in the background? She's a sad girlie. She just wants to play in the bathtub with me. But anyway, let's read about hieroglyphs. The beginnings of hieroglyphic writing date back to the birth of ancient Egypt at the end of the 4th millennium BCE. It was in this period that a series of figurative signs first appeared, mostly depicting animals. Some signs were engraved on rock massifs, such as the recently discovered El Kawi inscription, while others were marked on stone statues. The 3 limestone colossi from the shrine at Coptos are impressive examples. Figurative signs have also been found on small ivory labels and vessels placed in the tombs of early rulers, such as the labels found in tomb Uj at Abydos. Whether these early signs should be considered writing proper or designating concepts without direct association to language is still an open question among researchers. The first inscriptions that definitely meet the criteria of hieroglyphs date to around 3150 BCE. They show various characteristics of hieroglyphic writing. For example, there are logograms, signs that denote the name of the object they represent, together with other signs whose value is purely phonetic, like the letters of our current alphabet. Often these phonetic signs originated from the first logograms. For example, the mouth symbol, which you can see there, just a big oval, which in Egyptian is called Ra, was used to represent the phoneme R. In other words, that included that sound. Oh, R in other words that included that sound. I see what they mean. So the mouth symbol was an R, essentially. The earliest hieroglyphic inscriptions were very brief, in most cases expressing the name of a king or a place. They were often inscribed on ceremonial objects such as palettes, like the Narmer palette here. On the Narmer palette, for example, we find the name of Narmer, considered the first king of unified Egypt. The name is written using two signs, the catfish and the chisel, which appear within a sign called Serek, which symbolizes the royal palace and thus denotes kingship. The cats have zoomies now. We're just moving on. In a similar way, the name of cities was represented within a sign that symbolizes a walled enclosure. Both, I'm going to get some water real quick. This is kind of a disaster, but I'm telling you, this is the 5th time I've tried to film this video. This is the best take so far. Okay, to continue. Kingship. In a similar way, the names of cities are represented within a sign that symbolizes a walled enclosure. Both the Serek and this enclosure sign, although not pronounced, indicate visually which semantic category the name they contain belongs to. As the writing system developed, this semantic classification was indicated by unpronounced signs placed at the end of each word, the so-called determinatives or classifiers. For example, what are they doing? My goodness. For example, the determinative of this sign was included in all plant names, such as this word for vine and this word for papyrus. Or this spelling, I guess. Interesting. Sacred writing. In ancient Egypt, hieroglyphs were much more than simple vehicles for communicating a practical message. The Egyptians called their hieroglyphic signs Medu Nechter, words of the god or sacred words, since they believed that hieroglyphic writing was an invention of the god Thoth and was imbued with creative and magical power. Egyptians didn't create texts simply to be read. More importantly, they created them to ensure the magical and protective effect of the divine words. This explains why the signs were written on not only papyrus scrolls and stelae, but also architectural monuments, statues, furniture, funerary objects, and everyday items, including clothing. Eternal protection. It was typical for the walls of Egyptian temples to be completely covered with hieroglyphs, and many examples have been preserved. Although the visual impact is astonishing, the purpose was not merely decorative. Rather, the use of hieroglyphs in temples was related to the role of temples in the Egyptian worldview. The word temple in ancient Egypt was minu, derived from the verb men, meaning to remain, to establish, to be permanent. The stone temples of ancient Egypt were built with the idea that they would last for eternity, and the texts inscribed on them reflected this idea. The architecture of the temple was believed to represent, in miniature, the structure of the universe, with everything outside the sacred precinct representing the primordial chaos prior to creation. The outer facades of Egyptian temples were often decorated with magnificent reliefs depicting the pharaohs battling their enemies, an earthly clash that mirrored the struggle between order and chaos. Through this decoration, the religious and historical planes merged. Prayers on the walls. The interiors of temples and tombs were often covered floor to ceiling with hieroglyphs. Inscribed within the temple chambers were the ritual texts that priests would recite in front of statues of the gods. Around the doorways were texts indicating which grades of priests within the priestly hierarchy were allowed access to the next chamber and what purity requirements they had to meet. Inside the tombs themselves, there are hieroglyphic texts related to rituals designed to keep the deceased's memory alive. With many royal tombs, these texts transformed the underground space into a physical representation of the underworld, into which the pharaoh crossed when he reached the afterlife. Statues and stelae. In addition to covering the walls of temples and tombs, hieroglyphs were inscribed on a wide variety of objects. Stelae, large slabs, usually made of stone, could be inscribed with extensive religious texts, royal decrees, or accounts of military campaigns. Although the text on statues was often limited to the name, title, and kinship of the person represented, sometimes long texts of noble literary quality are found engraved on statues. These texts could include a detailed biography of the person represented or genealogy going back several centuries. Some statues were specially designed to provide a large, flat surface area on which to inscribe long texts. For example, the so-called block statues, which are cube-shaped from the chest down, you can see in this photo. The statue of Neb-Meru-Tef, an 18th century scribe, which is this here, demonstrates another ingenious method for inscribing text on a statue. Neb-Meru-Tef is depicted reading a papyrus under the supervision of the god Thoth. The papyrus is unrolled on his lap, and on it is inscribed a text detailing his titles and the actions he had performed in the service of the king. Objects used in burial practices were often inscribed with hieroglyphs too. In this case, the aim was to ensure that the name of the deceased would be remembered forever and to provide them with the protection they needed on their journey to the afterlife. To achieve this, magical religious formulas taken from texts such as the Book of the Dead were inscribed on coffins, boxes, and funerary masks. From the 30th dynasty onward, it became customary to inscribe these formulas on the linen bandages that wrapped the body of the deceased. Being in direct contact with the mummy, they were believed to offer additional protection beyond that of the amulets wrapped in the bandages. Formulas also appear on the wooden doors of some tombs, such as that of Sennacherib in Deir el-Medina, where they had a defensive role, protecting the most vulnerable part of the tomb. The magical effect of hieroglyphs was not limited to the afterlife. Egyptians wore amulets decorated with the sacred writing. There's evidence that during the Third Intermediate period, which was about 1075 to 715 BCE, people would roll up long, narrow strips of papyrus inscribed with magical formulas and wear them inside necklaces. One of these strips, preserved in the British Museum and likely worn by a baby, measures around 20 inches long, which may have corresponded to the size of the wearer. Egyptian style shorthand. Although the Egyptians believed their hieroglyphic writing had magical properties, they also used a simplified form for secular purposes, both administrative and literary. The simplified signs could be written quickly in 1 or 2 strokes using a brush dipped in ink. By the Second Dynasty, this cursive writing had been standardized into the so-called hieratic script. To make writing faster, certain groups of 2 or more signs were joined up using ligatures so they could be written with a single stroke of the brush. Looks like there's examples over here. The most common medium for hieratic writing was papyrus. The oldest surviving papyri date from the reign of Khufu. These fascinating papyri make up a journal belonging to the official named Merer, who headed a large team of builders working on the Great Pyramid of Giza. In the papyri, Merer records details about the distribution of the stone blocks for the building work, the quarries they came from, and how they were transported and paid for. From the Middle Kingdom onward, hieratic writing was also used to scribe literary texts on papyrus. In the 7th century BCE, with the rise of the 26th dynasty, an even more cursive form of hieratic script developed. The signs in this script, known as demotic, have such a simplified visual form that their hieroglyphic origin isn't obvious. Demotic script was used until the middle of the 5th century CE, 50 years after the last dated hieroglyphic inscription. By this point, the Egyptians no longer understood the hieroglyphic writing system that had defined the millennia-old pharaonic civilization and still adorned the temples and tombs of their country. Read this last page and then go look at all the pictures. This is about hieroglyphic healing. In Egyptian temples, it was common to find captivating statues and stelae used for magic. 3 are pictured here. A statue of Jedhor, priest healer of the temple of Athrbis, a statue of the priest Padamahis from Leontopolis, and the Metternich stela, commissioned by Esatum, a priest from Heliopolis. In the center of each appears an image of Horus the Child, or Harpocrates, standing on 2 crocodiles, and an effigy of the dwarf deity Bes, protector of childhood, on his head. The scene refers to an episode from Horus's childhood. While Horus was in the marshes, his mother Isis protected him from an attack by his uncle Set and cured him of a scorpion's sting. This type of sculpture was typically placed in a temple courtyard and used by priests specializing in medical treatments. Water would be poured over the sculpture and collected in a basin placed at its feet. It was believed that the water, as it flowed over the surface of the statue, was imbued with the magical power of the hieroglyphs, of the hieroglyphic writing. My goodness, I promise I can read. Hieroglyphic writing. It could then be used either in libations or offerings, or drunk to prevent and cure the stings and bites of poisonous animals. So you can see in the pictures here the image of Horus, like very similar on all 3 objects, which I'm sure were made at very different times in Egyptian history. How neat is that? This is the statue of healer Jedhor. This 4th century BCE statue sits on a plinth, incorporating 2 basins joined by a channel to collect water or wine with curative properties. The columns of hieroglyphic text include magical incantations, and this is at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Okay, collect the water right there. Here's the statue of Patamahis right here. The priest Patamahis is depicted walking. Hey, look at that. He wears a long tunic, a kerchief called a cloft on his head, and a plaque, which may be an amulet, on his chest. There. The statue comes from the city of Leontopolis in Lower Egypt and dates from the Ptolemaic period, and this is located at the Louvre Museum in Paris. This says, numerous protective spells cover the stela. Oh, that's about this. We'll read that after. Let's read about the magical stela. The Metternich stela was erected by the priest Esatum in honor of Pharaoh Nectanebo II and the sacred, what is that? The Menevis bulls. Interesting. It dates from the 30th dynasty and is made of greywack. So many words I've never heard before. This is located at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It was acquired in 1950. Let's see what these say now. It says, the numerous protective spells cover the stela. One of them reads, to seal the mouth of all reptiles in heaven or earth or in the water, to save the people, to pacify the gods, to glorify Ra. The solar disk is surrounded by 8 baboons. I'm guessing that's this up here. The baboons. 4 on each side. On the left appears Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, and on the right is the kneeling figure of Nectanebo II. Horus the child is depicted grasping miniature wild creatures in his hands, 2 scorpions, 2 snakes, a gazelle, and a lion. Right there. Interesting. This is a great photo of an interesting place. It says the last hieroglyphs. The last known Egyptian hieroglyphic inscription was created on the temple of Isis on the island of Philae in the year 452. In the background of this photograph is the temple's central sanctuary, where the sacred bark of Isis, long since removed from the site, was once displayed on a pedestal. Yeah, this is the place where hieroglyphs were last used, last carved out. It said in the article that they didn't know what they meant anymore. Pretty fascinating, I think. They're just going through the motions. Yeah, this over here is an example of that writing they're talking about. It says, a guide to dreams. The Chester Beatty III papyrus was composed in the 13th century BCE in hieratic script, or simplified hieroglyphic writing. It bears a poem exalting a victory of Ramses II and a manual for interpreting dreams, and this is at the British Museum in London. It says this measuring rod belonged to the 13th century BCE scribe all these names. Amenemopi. There we go. Amenemopi. Got it. Amenemopi. Included among its technical inscriptions is a eulogy to Pharaoh Horemheb. And this is at the Egyptian Museum in Turin. So here's one of those cool stela they talked about that, like, on the the top is a statue or a bust, and then it just goes into script here. This black statue depicts Senefer, treasurer during the reigns of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. The hieroglyphic text covering the surface includes a prayer in which he requests funerary offerings and stresses the important work he undertook for the pharaoh. And this is at the British Museum in London. Let's look at this little statue too that they talked about. The statuette below depicts Neb-Meru-Tef, royal scribe to Amenhotep III in the 14th century BCE. Holding a scroll in his lap, he is seated before the baboon god Thoth, patron of scribes, and this is at the Louvre as well. So neat. There's instruction manuals on the wall. Let's bring this down a bit. Using hieroglyphic texts to describe religious ceremonies, especially those related to the passage of the soul into the afterlife, was an ancient practice. In certain cases, temple walls were inscribed with texts related to the specific function of that particular room. The Temple of Khnum at Esna, for example, contains a type of room Egyptologists call the laboratory, a place where ointments were prepared. Inscriptions on the door jamb inventory the different kinds of aromatic substances the room holds. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera, built mainly in the 1st century BCE, includes a Wabet chapel dedicated to ritual cleansing, which we see here. The inscriptions detail the purification rituals to be carried out for the festival of the new year. And this is Karnak for sure. All these big columns. You can see the hieroglyphs on them. There. It's a cartouche, looks like right there. Supported by 134 colossal columns, the great hypostyle hall at Karnak was begun by Seti I in the 13th century BCE and completed by his son Ramses II. Later pharaohs added their own hieroglyphic inscriptions detailing their achievements and victories, creating a complex chronicle of Egyptian history. Look at this room. All gold and shiny all over. That's where the sarcophagus is. It says when he died around 1150 BCE, Ramses IV was laid to rest in the Valley of the Kings. The burial chamber shown here is decorated with funerary texts, including those from the Book of Amduat and the Book of the Dead. Look at all of it. All this writing here. This is the entrance to Medinet Habu, the temple of Ramses III. It was built in the mid-12th century BCE in Luxor. The hieroglyphs exalt his victories. Look how huge these are. There's a person right here. Look how big these hieroglyphs are on the outside. Pretty cool. This is a funerary cone. Inscribed clay cones were inserted above the entrance of tomb chapels. The inscription on the cone below bears the name and titles of a 7th century BCE official called Bassa. This is at the Louvre in Paris. I thought looking at this was like a wax seal or something, but it's just a cone kept over a door apparently. Here's the Narmer palette, one of the most famous artifacts from ancient Egypt, Narmer being the first pharaoh. And a palette as in like a makeup palette. On the other side there's a big indentation, and that's where they'd put powder for your face, or I don't know, your nose, your forehead. I always have to powder my forehead. Pretty cool. So I imagine, I've never seen the Narmer palette. I'm pretty sure it's in the Egyptian Museum. Yeah, in Cairo. It sure is. But I'm pretty sure like it's smaller than this picture depicts, because it's just a makeup palette. I'm sure it's like palm-sized. I I don't know. Is it? Has anyone seen it before? Some of you have told me about your trips to the Egyptian Museum. Not to mention the new Egyptian Museum, the Great Egyptian Museum, the Gem, just opened a few months ago. Has anyone been there yet? Let me know. It's bucket list. I'm dying to go. The Narmer Palette. Narmer, unifier of Egypt, circa 3100 BCE, is depicted grabbing an enemy by the hair on one side of this siltstone votive palette that stands over 2 feet high in the bottom panel. Oh, it's 2 feet high? Okay, well, I was very wrong. It's huge. Wait, what? I guess it's a votive palette, so probably held candles or incense. It's 2 feet in the bottom panel. No, that's a period. It's 2 feet high. It's huge. I've always assumed it was small. It's triple the size of this picture. Wow, I was very wrong. I wonder how many people left comments before I read that being, actually it's pretty big. Wow. Okay, well there goes my conception of the Narmer palette. 2 feet high, over 2 feet high. In the bottom panel, 2 figures flee. The king's sandal bearer looks on from the left. In the top right, the falcon god Horus perches on papyri, the symbol of Lower Egypt that Narmer had annexed. At the top, 2 cow heads symbolize the goddess Bat, who was later associated with the goddess Hathor. Oh, I see. There's the cows up there. There's an eagle, right? Eagle. Horse, a falcon. Grabbing him by the hair, snatching his wig. He says, I got your shoes. They're fleeing. Let's see what this says. It says, the hieroglyphs inscribed next to the 2 fleeing figures may refer to the names of 2 cities conquered by Hathor. Oh, so they represent the cities, probably. And this is a serek, a symbol representing the royal palace, is composed on 2 signs, one representing a catfish and the second a chisel. The name Narmer is inscribed inside. And they talked about that in the article. How neat is that? It says Narmer's name up there pretty much. Anyway, my bad. The future Ramses II with the sidelock of youth. So many words I've never heard before. With the sidelock of youth is depicted in front of the king list inscribed on the walls of the temple of his father, Seti I at Abydos. I guess that means this big piece of hair, like his head isn't shaved or anything. He's got just this big side lock, I guess. And then look at this neat symbol down here. It says a bone label bears an early example of an Egyptian pictograph, a precursor of the hieroglyphic system, likely representing grain and cattle. The circa 3200 BCE artifact was found in tomb Uj at el-Ka'ab in Abydos. Very cool. My poor cats really want my attention, so let me wrap this up. Looking at these beautiful golden walls here. Let's see what it says. Spreading their wings in protection, the goddesses Isis and Nephthys are surrounded by sacred texts in the 3rd golden shrine of the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings. This is also in the Egyptian Museum. Alright, I'm gonna go play with these sad cats. They really want my attention. They're very sad. I'm gonna go play with the cats. Maybe they're hearing all the stuff about Egypt and going, do you remember how important cats were to the Egyptians? Why aren't you giving us that attention? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this relaxing and educational. Sorry that it was a bit all over the place. But if you would like to request a future article, you can become a channel member right down there. and they get to choose what articles I read, and they get their names in the videos when they choose. Now she's in the litter box. She's about to go poopy, and then she's going to be extra crazy. She's going to sue me, so I gotta go. Become a channel member if you're able to or wish to. I'd appreciate that. And I hope that you have a good night.